Well, good day to you. It is the day after Christmas, 12/27, and I hope you're having a great day wherever you are. Now, if this is your first time ever listening to Search for Signs, my name is Gary Willing. I want to welcome you. I want to thank you to our channel. We have over 300 videos where we talk about the emergence of Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom. We take a deeper look at who and what Maitreya is. We talk about why are the Masters returning now to the everyday world during this historic yet tumultuous time. We tie it into the tumultuous events that are going on today, like the political divisions, economic uncertainty all around the world, of course. There's social unrest, and now we have things like the coronavirus, right? If you watch the news, if you watch alternative news sources and so forth, they're going to put it out there that there's not a lot of hope. Okay, now our side of the story is that there's actually an incredible amount of hope for us. So, if you're into gloom and doom, this might not be your channel, but if you're into something other than gloom and doom, maybe it's something like joy and hope, this might be right up your alley. Now, the reason why we think there's hope is because we also tie it into the many miracle signs that have been going on all around the world in all walks of life for decades, for the religious and the non-religious. And even within the religious groups, every single religious group is having their own set of miracles. And now, does it mean? Does it mean that they're all linked? Does it mean that the teacher who promised to come back for the Christians at some point in some way, but also made a promise to the Muslims to come back, also made a promise to the Buddhists and the Jews and the Hindus to come back, is that teacher already here? And has been for 40-something years now, since July 19th, 1977. Not only that, has also been speaking on TV, not declaring himself as the teacher come back, but just as an ordinary person who's deeply concerned about our ever-growing problems and the solutions thereof. So, if the teacher is not declaring himself as anything but just an ordinary person, it's probably not that important to know who he is. It's a lot more important to really look at his solutions and do something about it, right? Well, his biggest priority for humanity is that humanity must create peace. Now, we would look at it and we would think it's this lofty ideal that maybe possibly could happen one day or never at all, right? What Maitreya is going to show us is how to create peace IRL, in real life, in measured terms, right? Grounded in reality. He puts it like this. It's very simple, actually. Without sharing, there could be no justice. Without justice, there could be no peace. And without peace, there could be no future. So I do think the first thing that we all need to do is realize that our survival depends on whether we create peace or not, based on what Maitreya said. And then if we go back and look at the first piece of the puzzle, sharing, it's not socialism and it's not communism, comrade. I'm sorry, it's something totally different than that. It's looking at the excesses in a country, okay? Now I'm going to give you a brief overview of it, and then we're going to talk historically when this happened and the effects of it. But each country has excesses of something that they can give to another country. Each country has needs of something that they can take from those excesses and give back some excesses that they have, because every country has excesses to give, and every country has needs. Now, you would think that that wouldn't work, or how would that create peace? Well, let's look at it historically, in real life. This actually happened right after World War II. The powers that be looked at Europe and decided, rightfully, if we don't do something to help Europe out, a whole other war could flare up, and it could be World War III, or they could go into a dark age, or whatever. And so they realized that they needed to help out Europe in some way, shape, or form. It was kind of ingenious. What happened was the Secretary of State, George C. Marshall, under Truman, President Truman, came up with the Marshall Plan, where they took an inventory of the excesses in the United States that were just sitting there, doing nothing, that they could give away that wouldn't hurt our country. Just give them some of the excesses. And a lot of the excesses were food that are just going bad. So give them some food, give them some clothes. It allowed the Europeans to rebuild their homes, their schools, their businesses, roads, bridges, railways, all that stuff. All their infrastructure was rebuilt. It got the European people back on their feet. It quelled any social unrest because people's needs were taken care of, so they weren't quite as violent as they could have been if they were starving to death and said, screw it, we're just going to take somebody else's something, And so it transformed Europe. And if you look at Europe now, if you've ever been to Europe, there's really not a lot of evidence, if at all, that it was destroyed 70 years ago and leveled. I mean, everything's back to normal, really. But as it was rebuilt, they took the excesses and gave it back to the United States. It created an economic boom here in the 50s. So that was the initial effect. The long-term effect that I want to talk about really relates to what we're talking about here on this channel, is it was done for a brief time with a few nations, but the long-term effect over 70 years or so, the United States trusts Western Europe trusts the United States better than we trust any other nations on the planet. So with all the problems that are going on in the world today, with the technology that we have to be able to destroy ourselves, peace is essential for both those things, because anytime that there's a threat of war, it could escalate into a larger war. It's a possibility. Whether it happens or not, it's a possibility. But also, we have to have some trust and some goodwill amongst the nations to solve these problems, like our environment. If we don't, we're not going to solve it. So that's why peace is essential for our future. So, and sharing is the first part. So hopefully that helps. Now, I do have some questions to cover in this video, as I love to get into and answer and so forth. And if you have a question, post your question as a comment, and then we'll talk about it in the next video. How about that? Or you can email me at searchforsigns@mail.com. All right, now let's get into some of the comments, and then we'll get into some of the questions. All righty. First person's comment comes from Hopi1. And you are speaking fact and truth. Really? Question mark, question mark. Well, I'm just presenting it for everybody to think about. That's really what it is. So I'm not telling anybody to believe me. All right, but thank you for the comment. All right, now the next question, or comment, excuse me, comes from Sir Robert Lawrence. And I got to be honest with you, Robert, when I read that you were only 33 years old, that's not the picture I had in my mind when I was reading your comments. I was thinking you were like a 60-some-odd-year-old man. Maybe you're an old soul. Now, your comments are usually pretty long and in-depth, and I read through all of them, but I don't necessarily want to talk about all of them because they can get kind of long. So we're just going to touch on a little bit, and then we'll talk about the other one that you have. How about them apples? It says, I said in my book, because he's writing a book, that I am suspicious of Constance Cumbey and believe she serves the true Antichrist. I wrote, I believe Constance Cumbey is an agent of the spiritual forces behind the true Antichrist, and that is why she is trying to get people to believe Maitreya is the Antichrist. All right. That is a theory, and I will say this about Constance Cumbey, and then I'll talk about your comment. I believe she believes 100% in what she's saying, and I don't fault her for what she says. I'm sure she faults me. If she knew about me, she would fault me for what I'm saying. She certainly faulted Benjamin Creme, but she believes Maitreya is the Antichrist, and that's her right, and she's devoted nearly her whole life to trying to expose him as the Antichrist. Now, I don't agree with that, of course, but I do think you're onto something, because it talks about fear, because she puts out a lot of fear, just as William Cooper did when he was alive. And this is anybody, this is for anybody, not just those two individuals. We all have fear, but when we express our fear and talk about fear with our children or other people or so forth, we don't realize how it's affecting them. And it creates more fear in them, for instance. Also, we don't realize what it does to the environment, and we don't realize how far our fear goes out and all the damage it does before it comes back to us in equal proportion. That's the law of cause and effect. What you sow shall you reap. That's what Jesus said. Maitreya is going to talk about it a lot more scientifically, right? But also, if you put out joy and loving thoughts, it creates joy and love within other people. It may perhaps relaxes them, helps them overcome some of their fear. The Master Jesus told a friend of mine on a plane one time that, it's easier for people to change when they're surrounded by love. So if you're surrounding those around you with love, it's easier for them to change, and become more loving people themselves, to change their own ways if they were doing something they weren't supposed to be doing or whatever, than just being critical of them. But our love goes out, and it comes right back in equal proportion, and it hits us as loving, creative, positive, joyful thoughts. So the thing that I was talking about with William Cooper, as much fear as he had, I cannot imagine him being able to turn that off. I mean, he just seemed like he was just an unhappy person. I couldn't imagine him just taking a vacation and just going to, let's say, Pensacola, Florida, and being able to sit on the beach, watch the sun go down, and just be totally at ease and relaxed. His whole life was based on his fear. It affected all his children, probably, his wife, his friends, his family. It isolated him from the world, in a lot of ways, and it, I think, ruined his life. And that's what I was talking about. So now, in terms of Constance Cumbey, she puts out that same fear, right? And it's not just about Maitreya, I'm sure. She's like this in a lot of different things. The people who put out conspiracy theory fears are doing the exact same thing. Now, maybe not to the extent that William Cooper is, because they don't have that kind of mic. And if they do, they're hurting themselves in those exact same way. But fear, the forces of darkness use fear to keep people where they're at. I mean, and we all have fear. So you're right in thinking this, but she's being used indirectly at the very least by the forces of darkness, because she's spreading fear of all kinds. And not just about Maitreya, this is anything, right? So when people express fear and they go on TV and they talk about fear of the economy going down or the markets going down, and oh my God, we're going to hell in the handbasket, or there's going to be anarchy next year because the markets are going down, or because if you vote Democrat and you'll say you're a Republican and you're putting out that fear, if you vote for these, like they're doing this now and here in Georgia, if you vote for Raphael Warnock or David Ossoff, oh my God, the radical left, oh my God, if they're going to take control of Washington, and that's the end of life as we know it in the United States, right? It's just fear. There's no truth to any of that. But all that fear that goes out affects people, and it damages their lives, and it'll eventually come back on those people who are putting out fear. But they're being used indirectly by the forces of darkness. So you're onto something, I think, to that. Now, the other thing you were talked about in terms of the Shroud of Turin, we'll talk about that in a second. We'll kind of downshift into a miracle sign. According to you had mentioned something that the Turin Shroud, you had read that it's not a phony, but it's also not Jesus. It was one of the Grand Masters of the Knights Templar or something, right? Isn't that what it was? According to my information, there's no truth to that. That's a theory. I can't prove it any more than you can. But according to the masters, the Shroud of Turin was the burial shroud of Jesus. And the esoteric view of Jesus on the cross, dying on the cross, and coming back and being raised from the dead 3 days later, they have a different view and meaning of why that happened and the purpose for humanity for that than would say an evangelical Christian. But historically, both sides agree that actually happened. Now, according to the esoteric view of what happened, Jesus, when he died on the cross, went to the higher levels of the spiritual plane called the Pralaya, and then reincarnated some years later as Apollonius of Tyana, the Greek philosopher. There's actually a conspiracy theory that Jesus survived the crucifixion some kind of way, slipped away out of Palestine, and lived out the remaining part of his life as Apollonius of Tyana. But there's no truth to that. It was just a subsequent reincarnation of Jesus. Now, the esoteric view of the resurrection was when Jesus' body was in the tomb, Maitreya, who had overshadowed Jesus during the time of the baptism to the crucifixion, re-entered Jesus' body. And when he did that, it created all this light that imprinted the image of Jesus onto the burial shroud of the Shroud of Turin. And then lived for some time, spoke to the disciples just like it's written in the Bible, and then left. But it was a symbol for the evolution of a person to become a master. Jesus, and the esoteric view of the crucifixion is much different than the evangelicals who think that he died for our sins and so forth like that. So, but just two different views of the same event is really what it amounts to. Now, eventually, according to Ben's master, when the Master Jesus is out, known for who he is, somebody's going to ask him about the Shroud of Turin, and he will claim it as his burial shroud. So then we'll know. So Up until then, it's just two different views of the same event. Now, kind of leads me to the next question. All right, so the next question. Oh, well, before I get into that, you wanted me to address, Robert, my point of fact that even if the Antichrist, as the book of Revelation states, it is an energy, people could still imitate the Antichrist. Well, I mean, I guess. I think it's more of, like I said, I think you're onto something, but I wouldn't necessarily phrase it in that way, I guess. Maybe we're splitting hairs here. But I think that if you look at it esoterically, the Antichrist was able to be re-released into the world because there was 3 points of darkness during World War II. The Nazis in Germany, the fascists in Italy, and the militarists in Japan. Hitler, of course, was the poster child for the World War II, the Axis powers. But so one could say he's the Antichrist, but he wasn't really even the Antichrist. It was the group, that whole group, that really embodied the Antichrist energy. When World War II ended, they were defeated but not destroyed. They were supposed to be sealed off to their own domain and not have any influence or hardly any influence on humanity for the next, this age of Aquarius, so 2,500 years plus another half age. Because in the Bible it says the beast will be chained back for a time and a half. He was talking about that. But what happened was, and eventually that will happen, I think, once Maitreya is out after the Day of Declaration. But up to this point, they were able to kind of get some extra innings in there. So they stuck their foot in the door to keep the door from totally sealing on them. And it resurfaced again in the Zionist movement in Israel, in then Yugoslavia, or now the kind of the Baltic Slavic states, and in the Pentagon. And since then, the Pentagon, we'll talk about the Pentagon one, has been really influential over every single presidential administration since the building of the military-industrial complex, according to Ben's master. The Republican presidents seem to be more susceptible to it than Democrats, but even the Democratic presidents like Obama, like Jimmy Carter, have been, Kennedy, I guess even, have been used by them in some way, shape, or form. Now, so it would be probably better to say that that influence, that energy does influence people. I think Ben's master talked about how influential it was over the George W. Bush administration. And you can kind of see historically what happened right after World War II, how they used the national pride and the national, ego of the United States for their own gain to help position themselves in the world and attack two countries that were totally innocent of 9/11 and so forth. You can kind of see it now with Trump. Not that Trump's the Antichrist, but he is being, I'm sure, used by that energy to a greater or lesser extent. That's why people are so infatuated with who he is. He had his base would go right into a pit of fire for him, and they think he's God, and he's not. He's just a con man / building developer from New York, what I'm saying, who just happened to use that and be used by that energy. But, I think, to my opinion, and what people are in love with is they're in love with the ideal that's in their head. There's no truth to it, but the forces of darkness are using that illusion and glamour against its own people. And then I think once Trump is out of office, his energy and everything will change. Just like with George W. Bush. George W. Bush was in the same position, like this, 20 some odd years ago, right? And he could do no wrong. People were in love with this guy. And I remember looking, going, what the heck is their problem? This guy's not even remotely what you're saying he is. Oh my gosh, his hand is being, moved by God himself, right? Well, anyway, now if you watch an interview with George W. Bush, his energy seems totally different than it did when he was president. I mean, totally different. And I think it was that nefarious energy that was working through him, to be honest. That's just my opinion of it. But anyway, now to get on to the next question. Somebody said, all right, so this is coming from Christians Exposing the New World Order. Okay, I'll read this comment out. I appreciate you answering my question. I understand that you are what you are saying. And we have the same goals. We just have different views of who is bringing the kingdom of God upon earth. I'm reading the book by Alice Bailey, The Externalization of the Hierarchy. And she said that there are two New World Order choices, the tyrannical New World like the Deep State, and then the New Age, NWO, that she promoted. The one she favored seems like the same New Age of Aquarius that Maitreya may be bringing. She speaks about the Masters of Wisdom, the spiritual hierarchy, who are moving us into the age of Aquarius. If you really study Alice Bailey, Theosophy, Lucis Trust, and Helena Blavatsky, which actually Alice Bailey is Lucis Trust and Helena Blavatsky is Theosophy. So anyway, Theosophy is based on Luciferianism, as they see Lucifer as the good guy who brought light to man and set man to free. I want to know what your thoughts are on Lucifer, and if Maitreya has any relationship to Lucifer and Luciferianism. From the Bible, Lucifer is the great deceiver who appears as an angel of light to deceive the world. The Antichrist will come as an angel of light and as a false Messiah, as the cosmic Christ. He will be so convincing that he will deceive almost the whole world. From my research, it will be one world system based on Gnosticism, Theosophy, and Luciferianism. I was just wondering if Maitreya is in any way promoting Gnosticism, Theosophy, and Luciferianism. Thanks again for answering my question. I do appreciate it. All right. Now, you are, of course, welcome. Let me get a couple things squared away here before we get into your question. Okay, so Alice Bailey, the Lucis Trust is the publisher of the Alice Bailey work. So those two are the same kind of. And then the Theosophical Society is the publisher of Helena Blavatsky's works. So now, it is not true to say that Maitreya is bringing us into the New Age. Is that what you said? Oh, no, it's not true. Yeah, wait, where did you put it? Yeah, that's what you said. You said the New Age of Aquarius that Maitreya may be bringing. That's not accurate. We'll talk about that in a second. And it's not true to say that the masters are moving us into the age of Aquarius. Our own sun is. So, an astronomical fact, okay, and this can be proved by going to any observatory and talking to an astronomer who knows the constellations and can tell you this, that our sun goes around an orbit in the cosmos. And when it does, it comes into alignment with one or other of these constellations. That's the astronomical fact. Now, the other side of the other part of the story, from the esoteric or the ageless wisdom teachings, is that all is energy. And science is really proving it more and more that pretty much everything is energy. Thoughts energy, light's energy, that kind of thing. Now, this energy is not dead and lifeless. There's a purpose behind it, and there's a consciousness to it. But these energies also have different qualities to them. And when our solar system comes into alignment with one or other of these solar systems, or these constellations, each constellation's energy is different, and it affects humanity on whatever level we're at differently than the other energies do. So, the energies of Pisces create a very strong, potent individualism, an idealism, and so forth. And that energy coming from Pisces affects everything in our solar system, not just us on planet Earth. It affects all the masters. It affects the the humanity and civilizations on other planets and so forth. But they're usually on a higher level than us, like Venus and Mars. They are. So they're on the higher rung of the ladder. So even though it might change their way of relating and functioning differently, it might be slightly different, it would be much more on a divine level than ours because of the fact that we're on a much lower level than they are. So here on Earth, bringing it back down to Earth, that energy of Pisces creates a very strong individualism in us. So we're to the point where we're living today, we can be living in a world very comfortably, go to bed every night, watch TV, go to sporting events, have open Christmas presents with our family and friends, and yet there are people who are going hungry in the world every day. And it doesn't seem to affect us. It does, really, but in our own little worlds, it doesn't affect us because we see life totally separate from everybody else. The economic, the political, the social, the educational, the healthcare structures, even the artistic structures are all based off of our strong, potent individuality. Now, our economic structures, for instance, are a good example of this. They are set up and designed to serve the very, very few at the expense of the very, very many. So you have a very, very few people like the Jeff Bezos, the Mark Zuckerbergs, and so forth, that are quite wealthy. And their wealth keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And yet people are getting poorer and poorer and poorer and poorer and poorer, more out of it, but yet it doesn't matter to them. That's the structures that we have today. It was built under the light of Pisces, but it's humanity's wrong use of that energy is really what it amounts to. So the next time we come into the age of Pisces, we won't go back to where we were right now. We'll be on a much higher level than we are now. But the structures are crumbling just, and they're not working like they used to. And our world leaders don't know what to do because the ways of doing it in the past are not working. So we have a political system in the United States that used to kind of work. You know what I mean? Now you have two systems. You have the right and the left, and nobody's talking and nothing's getting done. They can't even agree on a budget, let alone, real serious problems that we have to face as a nation. You know what I mean? So nothing's getting done. So that's crumbling. Do you see what I'm saying? And people will express this all the time. It wasn't like this 50 years ago or 100 years ago when I read the history books. It wasn't this bad, right? Well, that's because the system is crumbling over and over and over again. Now, the problem is, if we go on much longer, because we're moving into under the more of the light of Aquarius, our solar system is doing it, not the masters. Our solar system is moving us into that those structures won't physically work. You know what I'm saying? They'll actually go dead. And then we won't have any structures. And then it's just pure anarchy at that point because we won't have anything. So the masters and Maitreya are coming back now to help us build structures for the new and so the new qualities of Aquarius are synthesis, brotherhood, cooperation, sharing, justice, and peace. But these are just words. These are 6 words that, because we are living our lives very individualistically, very idealistically, we might have a concept of it, but we don't know how that's going to look in real life. IRL, right? How will the structures work? How can you have peace? That's impossible. No, it's only impossible under the light of Pisces. It's not impossible under this new energy. So that's why these masters are here to teach us this. The first step is we have to create the principle of sharing. That's what Maitreya is going to advocate. He's not going to advocate that people stop being Christians. He's going to say we need to create a principle of sharing. We need to institute the principle of sharing. That's the very, very first step. Nothing else can really be built until we do that. That's the foundation. So that's why these masters are coming out now, to help us build those structures so we don't let our current structures go totally implode and then there's nothing behind it. You know what I'm saying? But those structures that we have today are eventually going to have to be destroyed to allow a new structure to be built. But we have to have, we're like monkeys swinging on a tree. We have to have another tree to swing to. You know what I'm saying? So right now we're on the rope swinging from this structure to something that's not even there yet. You know what I'm saying? So that's why we swing back over to where we are, and then we'll keep swinging until we build that new tree so we can swing over and whoop. And then once we see the new structures work, we're going to let the other structures just go, because the vast majority of people these structures do not help them. So when they see that the new structures will help them, they'll be like, well, shoot, why were we even, so caught up in trying to keep these structures together? Do you see what I'm saying? But that's really what's going on today. Now, so that's not, like I said, it's not true to say that the masters are bringing us into that age. It's the solar system itself that's doing it. Now, in regards to the word Lucifer, okay, now, the Latin derivative of Lucifer is lux, which is light, right? That's the Latin root of that word. Lucifer is Latin for light bringer. That's what that word means. Now, it has a different connotation for Christians as it does for the esotericists like Alice Bailey. Now, if I was around during Alice Bailey and I was around her when she was writing her books, and I had the courage to say this to her, I would probably say to her, you might want to think of using a different word. Now, there might be a purpose of why she used that word and why she did it. But you and I both know that you can use a word or a phrase for one group of people, and it will have a totally different connotation, and you'll get a totally different reaction with a different group of people, right? So when she uses the word Lucifer to somebody like me, it doesn't bother me like that. I can understand where she's coming from. But for somebody like you, who's more of a fundamentalist Christian, well, of course you're going to be very triggered by it. So I would have told her, said, look, you might want to try a different word. You might even want to spell out Lightbringer instead of using that word Lucifer. I don't know, because it's unfair, but this is just the state of human nature, is there are certain words that people will get stuck on, and they won't even listen to anything else you're saying. So if she wanted people to hear what she was saying, she might want to look at a different word, right? But anyway, so look at the phrase, you people. If I'm white, and if I was talking to 50 Caucasians, and I said, you people are making me mad, right? They're not going to have a problem with that. But if I was talking to 50 African Americans who were not my friends, who are total strangers, and I said that same thing to them, you people are making me mad, or whatever, they are going to have a totally different view of what I said and why I said it. And it would be like a hornet's nest. She used a word that I think, because of the connotation for Christians, it created a hornet's nest for them. And you can't even hear anything else that she says, right? So that's the problem with that. So to answer your question, the way that you would say that those words are, Luciferianism, Satan worship, no, there's no relation to Maitreya about Satan worship. Okay? The esotericist, coming from the Ageless Wisdom teachings, and this is Alice Bailey's, what she was saying. Lucifer was written in the Bible to describe the soul of humanity, the oversoul of humanity. We are fragments of that one soul. Genesis, the same way. There was no naked man named Adam and naked woman named Eve, and a bit of his body parts, his ribs, were given to her to create her. That's all symbols that perhaps Moses, I guess, who wrote it, and was speaking to people that had no understanding of science, of history, of time frames, or anything. He was just speaking a story which eventually became a myth, but he was speaking a story to describe the origins of mankind 18.5 million years ago. Lucifer was written into the Bible as to mean the oversoul of humanity, not a fallen angel that struck a war against God, that's still here deceiving all of us, that will eventually come back out and fool all humanity. There's no truth to any of that from the Ageless Wisdom's perspective. So, of course, you believe what you believe. I'm just giving you a different view. So, that's what I think she meant by that. Again, I disagree with her use of that word based on the fact that it would trigger people. But there must be a reason why she did it. I don't know. But that's just my humble opinion about it. Now, in terms of the Antichrist, you said the Antichrist will come as an angel of light and as a false Messiah, as the cosmic Christ, which is you just put that in there based on what Benjamin Creme talked about, or Alice Bailey talked about in terms of Maitreya being a Christ. But anyway, he will also be convincing and will deceive almost the whole world. Okay, so the Antichrist coming back as an angel of light, is that coming from Paul? Because there was a verse in the Bible. Paul said, even Satan can disguise himself as an angel of light, right? Isn't that and I've had people from time to time try to throw that my way. Oh, see, I knew it. I knew your guy was the Antichrist. Because Paul said it. Even Satan can disguise himself as an angel of light, right? That's the saying, right? I think Paul wasn't talking about an Antichrist figure. Again, a phrase or a sentence is just like a word. It has a different meaning for you than it has for me. But the meaning that has for me when I read that, Paul was talking to people that had no understanding of psychology, of the mind, of intention, of subconsciousness, whatever. And he was telling them, in his own way, that you have to look at your motives. You might think you're doing the ultimate good and you're actually harming somebody. So, even Satan can disguise himself as an angel of light. You might think it's an angel of light that came to you and gave you all this wonderful information. I mean, I don't know. But he was just talking to people so they could understand him. Not much different than Krishnamurti, which is another video that you sent my way. He used to always say, you have to be very, very diligent, very diligent. on looking at your motives, looking at your thoughts, moment to moment, right? Well, he was talking to a whole different type of people, that could understand him. Had Paul been living today and he wanted to get that point across, he might say something very similar that Krishnamurti said. You have to be very, you have to look at your intentions. You have to, look at that moment to moment, because if not, you might think you're doing something good when you're doing something bad. Had Krishnamurti been living 2,000 years ago or so when Paul was around and he was speaking to those people, he might have had to say, even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light, to get that point across. But I don't think Paul was talking about any Antichrist figure now or in the future, whether it's Maitreya or not. Now, Maitreya is not promising peace. He's saying that we created the problems that we're in. We did it. The only way we can get out of it is together. And the only way to do that is starting with the principle of sharing. That's all he's saying. Now, his promise is if we create the principle of sharing and we actually give the excesses that God gave all of us to other countries that need it, it will help. It will eliminate hunger. It will eventually bring about justice, which will bring about goodwill among the nations and trust and peace. That's what he's saying. He's not saying if you follow him or you stop being a Christian and fool all the millions of people or billions of people out there that then we'll have peace. He'll never once say that, because he hasn't said that. So there's also a saying in the Bible, what were those who think good is evil and evil good, right? And they also say, and I've had people throw this my way, in the end times. Well, in the Old Testament, when I went back and read that, it never once said in the end times. He just said, woe are those who see evil as good and good evil. They did that during the time of Jesus. Jesus was the ultimate good. And they put him to death because they thought he was evil. You know what I'm saying? They even said he was a demon, right? And what was Jesus' response? Well, if I'm a demon, why am I casting out demons? As my daughter would say, that's counterintuitive, right? Which is a nerd speak for a dumb idea. It's the same thing with Maitreya. I would consider evil and hunger and starvation and injustice and evil, right? Or war and evil, I'm sorry. I would consider war, injustice, and starvation and evil. And if he is here to help us and to teach us to eliminate those evils from our lives, then how is he evil? It's the same thing that Jesus said. If I'm a demon, why am I casting out demons, right? In terms of like I said, in terms of Lucifer, look at it as she was speaking. She said that word. I don't agree with that word. You're using that word. That's why I don't use that word willy-nilly on this channel, because I know how it triggers people, right? But there is no truth in thinking that she was talking about anything to do with the devil or devil worship. None. She was just speaking it in a different way. And it has two different connotations for two different people. So, does that help? But anyway, I've let this video go way too long, but I do want to thank you again for the questions, and I look forward to more in the future. You take care. SOP, save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.